Okay, I want to show you something. This is a map of the world. If you've been paying attention to the news, you might think that the AI race looks something like this. America here, China over here. But that map is wrong. The real map of AI power looks completely different. And when I started digging into it, I found connections that I never expected. A frozen island that billionaires are fighting over, a tiny place that could take down the entire industry, workers making $2 an hour who are essential to every AI system you've ever used. Today, I'm going to redraw this map for you. We're going to travel across the continents, and by the end, I think you'll see the world differently. If you're new here, I'm Walter Pasquarelli. I spent the last 10 years advising governments, businesses, and investors on AI strategy. If you're interested in hype-free analysis on artificial intelligence, consider subscribing. This is the real map of AI power. You'll never understand the AI race if you don't know what AI power looks like first. Think of AI as a stack, so layers built on top of each other. At the top, you have the models, so the ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini. This is what most people see. But those models need somewhere to run. So the next layer down is data centers, massive warehouses filled with supercomputers processing billions of calculations every second. And those data centers are filled with chips. They are the hardware that makes AI possible. Without these chips, nothing works. And chips don't appear out of thin air. They're built from raw materials, rare earth elements, minerals people never think of, germanium, cobalt, lithium. Then there's energy, because AI systems consume massive amounts of it, and a large data center can consume as much electricity as a small city. And finally, at every layer of the stack, there are people. Engineers designing the models, workers building data centers, technicians manufacturing chips, miners extracting minerals, and a largely invisible workforce doing jobs that most people never see. Models, data centers, chips, energy, minerals, labor. That's the stack. And here's the key point. As you move down the stack, the geography of power shifts. So let's travel the world and see who controls what. The United States is winning at the top of the stack. Every major index, every major benchmark puts the United States first. Microsoft, Meta, Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, the most advanced AI models are built right there. And most of this infrastructure is privately owned. So a recent study found that Microsoft, Meta, and xAI are the main holders of the specialized chips that power AI. But the US government is building too. So America is ahead, but what about everyone else? For years, the United States tried to control this competition through export controls. Back in the days, the Biden administration created the AI diffusion rule, and it divided the world into 3 tiers based on how close you were aligned with American interests. But in May 2025, the Trump administration tore up that playbook. They call it too administrative, too bureaucratic. The new approach would be bilateral deals, so country by country negotiations. And to understand what that means, let's cross the Atlantic. Europe has an AI identity crisis. While the US and China race to build models, data centers, and chips, Europe appears to be wanting to become the master of regulation. And it did write the rules first through laws such as the EU AI Act. That brought moral authority. It also brought delay. And it's ironic because Europe would technically have everything that it takes. It has top-tier talent, world-class universities, elite researchers, and red tape. You could say we don't have to participate in a careless race dynamic, and that's a true argument, but there's probably a difference between being reckless and wanting to stay competitive. To set up my business in London, it took me 24 hours. In Germany, where I grew up, it would have taken me weeks, possibly months, and a lot of paperwork. Risk capital is the other missing piece. In the United States, venture capital tolerates failure in the pursuit of scale and success. In Europe, startups are expected to look safe before they're allowed to look ambitious. So many European founders, when they want to scale up and grow, they tend to leave. There are some exceptions, Mistral AI being one of them, and they're proof that Europe can build frontier AI. But even Mistral hit the same constraint, and to scale up, it had to partner with Microsoft. The UK is somewhat different. It has deeper risk capital, and it is home to leaders such as DeepMind, and that has kept it closer to being at the front of the AI race. Now, as tensions with the new US administration increase, Europe is talking once again about strategic autonomy. In Germany, one state, for example, has announced to move government workers away from Microsoft Office tools. So it is a revealing moment. Europe is rediscovering sovereignty at the level of email software 20 years after the decisions on infrastructure were already made. But to understand where power in AI actually sits, we need to travel east to a small island in Asia where the entire AI race bottlenecks. This is Taiwan, about the size of Maryland, 24 million people, China claims it as their territory, the West recognizes it as a sovereign state. Yet, Taiwan produces over 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors, which are needed to develop AI. One company, TSMC, dominates this market so completely that if something happened to their factories, the entire AI industry would grind to a halt. Every major AI company totally depends on them. Nvidia, Qualcomm, Google, Microsoft. Without TSMC, there's no AI race. Think about what that means. The most critical layer of the AI stack, concentrated on a tiny island just 100 miles away from another country that wants to take it over. Some in Washington want Taiwan to move half of the chip production to the United States, but Taiwan has made clear they're not giving up their leverage. Taiwan's vice premier responded pretty bluntly. He said, "We will not agree." That's because those factories are their shield. As long as the world needs Taiwanese chips, the world has a stake in Taiwan's survival, because just across the strait from Taiwan sits America's only real competitor. China ranks second on every global AI index, and they have their own AI giants: Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, Huawei, or SenseTime. But there's something that makes China different, because these companies work hand in hand with the state. The line between private enterprise and government is pretty blurry. When the state wants something done, they get it done. China sat in that restricted tier. They're under US embargoes, cut off from the most advanced chips. But they're not standing still, because they're now building their own semiconductor industry. They're stockpiling chips, and they have a leverage of their own at a different layer of the stack. Every chip requires rare materials: gallium, germanium, rare earth elements, lithium, or cobalt. And one country controls most of it. China produces about 70% of the world's rare earth elements. More importantly, it controls about 90% of the refining. So even minerals found elsewhere often end up in China. In 2025, Beijing imposed export control on heavy rare earths, and supply chains across automotive and defense industries were disrupted practically overnight. So America has a problem. They're winning at the top of the stack, but they're dependent on the biggest rival at the bottom, which brings us to a place that nobody expected before. President Trump said he wants Greenland. When he first floated that idea years ago, everyone laughed. Denmark said it wasn't for sale. Greenland's leaders were even offended. But here's what I found when I started digging. Greenland sits on one of the largest deposits of rare earth minerals on the planet. 25 of the 34 minerals the European Union considers critical are there. These are the exact materials that China controls. And quietly, some very wealthy people have already invested in companies using AI to locate and extract minerals from the Arctic. Now, actually getting these minerals is incredibly hard. Greenland has brutal weather, almost no roads, and only 60,000 people in total. So getting from exploration to actual production could take decades. So the strategic logic is clear. Greenland is a medium-term play. So for now, the countries that really matter are the ones that are caught in the middle. And they have something that neither the US or China can ignore. This is the Middle East, and what's happening here might be one of the most consequential things that are happening in the entire AI race. May 2025, President Trump visits Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The numbers from that trip are staggering, as American companies sign deals with billions. So why are the Gulf states suddenly becoming AI powers? It's two things: money and energy. They can write checks that nobody else can match, and they have something that every data center desperately needs. Running AI systems consumes enormous amounts of electricity, but in the Gulf states, energy is abundant and cheap. But here's where things get complicated. To keep access to American chips and partnerships, UAE-backed AI giant G42 had to make a choice. No Chinese connections or no American technology. They divested completely from Chinese companies. For example, by dumping a $100 million stake in ByteDance, which is TikTok's parent company. Officials say they're keeping the door open, but even for countries like Saudi Arabia, they're walking that same tightrope. And so the Gulf is in a bind. They have the energy, they have the capital, but they don't have the chips, and they don't have sufficient expertise. So as the AI race intensifies, their entire AI ambitions hinge on not alienating the wrong superpower. But there are two more pieces of this map I need to show you that most people don't think about. So let's head west, across the Atlantic. Nobody's talking about Latin America in the AI race, but they should be. The market is projected to nearly double, $5 billion in 2023 to almost $10 billion by 2029. Brazil is the epicenter, and they make up about over 40% of all Latin American data center investments. Head north to Mexico, and you'll see the second hotspot, Further south, Chile is branding itself as the green option. Now, the draw is obviously the proximity to the United States. They call it nearshoring. But here's where the story gets uncomfortable, because right now, communities living near these massive data centers are seeing their taps run dry. Water shortages, power outages. Meanwhile, their pension funds are being invested into what some financial analysts call a potential bubble. We made a separate video on that. You can right-click on that, and I recommend you watch it later on. So Latin America is caught between the promises of a digital future and the very real consequences that are being paid right now. And that brings me to the bottom of the stack, the human cost. The AI revolution has a human cost, and it's being paid in Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Around 70% of the world's cobalt comes from here. Cobalt is essential for rechargeable batteries. Batteries power data centers run AI. Most of this cobalt is mined by Chinese or European multinationals, and these mines are implicated in child labor, dramatically unsafe work conditions, poverty wages. An estimated 40,000 children work in these mines, and it doesn't stop there. Travel east to Kenya, and you'll find the people who train AI models as content moderators. They review the material and filter out the most disturbing content from the internet so that chatbots don't become violent or racist or abusive. Workers report being paid between $1 and $2 an hour to review graphic images about violence and abuse. So it's hundreds of images a day. Many of them develop PTSD or depression. The power imbalance here is enormous. Because of high unemployment rates, there's always someone who's desperate enough to take up one of these jobs. So when we talk about the real costs of AI, we're not just talking about electricity bills or chip prices. We're talking about children in mines. We're talking about traumatized workers in Nairobi. We're talking about communities whose water has been consumed by data centers. The AI revolution will have winners, but it also will have people who share the burden without reaping its benefits. This is the bottom of the stack, the human foundation that makes everything else possible. So here's the map redrawn. Models, data centers, chips, energy, minerals, labor. And I should say these are not all countries. Other big players include India for AI talent or Singapore for world-leading AI policies. But at least you now know the new geography of power that's unfolding. And I don't think anyone knows what will happen next. Thank you for traveling with me across the world. If you found this video interesting, like, subscribe, share. Let me know in the comment section, do you think there's any particular country that I've missed, or do you think there's any particular country that is especially important? I'd love to know from you, and keep the conversation going. Till the next time.